Hello, and welcome to the Catching the Octopus podcast. Here, we will explore how connecting inward gives us an advantage outward. We openly talk about the obstacles and challenges and difficulties that life throws our way and how they become moments of gratitude and things that can benefit us when we look back on our lives. I'm your host, Niomi Hurley, and it is my mission to bring you top quality guests that will share with you openly their obstacles and also the techniques they use to go inward that strengthens the way that they serve themselves and others at the highest level. Thank you for joining. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. Welcome back. We've had a little bit of a break over the Christmas and festive season, so it's great to be back in the podcasting seat and doing something I love. And I just wanted to start the year off with something a little fresh and something a little different. And I find that when we face challenges in our personal lives, we tend to think that just pushing them down or pushing them aside is the way that we can effectively go on and be the leader that we hope to be. Now, that's not always the case, right? Because we're not robots. And there's this, sort of theory that when you come into the workplace, you drop all of your personal stuff off at the gate or at the door, and you come in and you show up and you be what you're paid to be, right? In that leadership role, and you deliver those components the best way that you can. But that's not usually how it works, because as humans, we're filled with different thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that interact with each other. So you've often heard me say there's three things that we can have control of: our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors. Now, if there's anything that happens though in our lives that takes away our ability to control any of those three things, then we are in a position where we're actually governed by our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors. And for me, the last 6 months has been really quite significant in the way of different things coming up, different changes happening. In fact, without going into too much detail, because obviously I've got to respect the privacy of the people that are around me, my whole world was turned upside down in a matter of ways from different things that had happened. And there was so much change that I had to adapt to. Now, I'm someone that says I love change, but I also love my certainty as well, right? So if you look at, Tony Robbins talks about 6 core human needs, and there's certainty and there's uncertainty, but they have different, there are 2 of them, but they have different ways of affecting our lives and the different ways of us being able to tap into those to be able to operate effectively. So, although I'm okay with uncertainty and I'm okay with change and I'm okay with all of these things that go on that put us into different learning experiences and challenge us, there's a threshold that not just me, but there's a threshold that everyone has from where that becomes okay and comfortable and easily to adapt to the next level that can be a little bit uncomfortable, but it stretches us and it challenges us. And so we can adapt in that space as well if we concentrate on doing so. But then there's the even next level, and that takes us into a space where it can feel really turbulent, and it really takes away a lot of that capacity to be able to control our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors. And in that space where change is happening in there, where things in our lives don't have some of the consistency that keeps us feeling safe, then those impacts then can ripple through to other areas in our lives, and they can ripple through into our work environments. They can ripple through into our leadership, because it's when we're in those spaces there that a lot of the times our tolerance is thinned out, or our resilience is thinned out. Our emotional intelligence can actually not be as on point as what it would normally be, because we're swimming in that cloud of emotion, right? And you will often see if if you're in a problem, or if a friend, say a friend or a family member's in amongst a problem that's taking them out of comfort into discomfort, into total chaos, even, and in that space where their emotions and their thoughts and their behaviors are starting to drive them rather than them having control of those, that you may be able to come up with a solution like that, like straight away, and say, hey, why don't you think of doing X, Y, and Z? But while that person is in there and that emotion is actually clouding them, it's kind of like having a windscreen that's covered in dust and bugs. You can still kind of see while you're driving to navigate. But if you put the windscreen wipers on and cleared that out, you have so much better vision moving forward. So when we're in that space, it can be difficult for us to see that clear vision that other people can see. And so then that can create a whole range of other issues. So in the workplace, especially, we might be snapping a little bit more or not having as much tolerance to some of the behaviors of the people around us that we normally would not be easily affected by. And those sorts of things can then create bigger issues, especially if we come into the space where we're triggered and we don't have that ability to come back and go, oh, I was just triggered. That's interesting. Why? And go into curiosity. We may just go into reaction. And then we can go and we can trigger back. And these can cause issues in relationships around us that can actually have long lasting effects. Right. So when we're going into the workplace as leaders, we have to have the ability to recognize that, look, maybe I'm not on top of my A game like I normally am. Maybe these things that are happening in my personal aspect, maybe I need to acknowledge that they do come through and they do flow through into my professional life as well. So once we can do that, then we can start working on how we're going to show up in the best way possible. Now, if we just take a step back to when we're in chaos, right? When we're in that space where everything around us is just sending us into a spin, we need to be able to do two things in that space. And the timing on these is completely different for each individual. So the first thing we need to do is feel. As humans, again, not robots, we need to be able to feel what is going on around us and feel what is happening within us. What is that creating in us? Is it creating anger? Is it creating sadness? Is it creating frustration? Or is it creating joy? Is it creating happiness? Is it creating gratitude? So we have to be able to feel what's going on. And I've spent most of my life just pushing away the way I felt. I was brought up in that era with the parenting styles of, if you cry, I'll give you something to cry for, kind of thing, right? So I wasn't really taught any other way to deal with my emotions other than, okay, I've got to get rid of this and I've got to move on. Now, that can have long lasting effects as well. And I see a lot of people in my RTT space that have physical ailments that come up, or that can actually create a real hard crust on people. And so in that leadership space, they don't have as much empathy for others, or they can't relate to people that are different to them because that's the way they've done it and it's worked for them. Crikey, it has to work for everyone else. But that's not always the case. So to really effectively move through that chaos, we need to be able to feel, and we need to sit in that and feel that for as long as we need to. But the thing is, we can't unpack there. So there has to come a point of feeling it, moving into that second element of what we got to do, and that's deal. We then have to deal with it. And this can be the tricky part, right? So being openly vulnerable now and oversharing, but not too much oversharing. As I said before, this affects other people and I am conscious of their privacy as well. But, there was one point in all of this chaos that I've just been coming out the other end of, where I couldn't, or not couldn't, didn't want to pull myself through. So I was in a space where I was really consumed by a lot of really high and deep emotions. And, I'm the first person that has all the tools in the toolkit to be able to navigate through them. And I was even speaking with a friend and she's like, oh, you could do this, you could do that. And I said, oh, look, I know what I could do, but I don't want to. I was just so overwhelmed with the emotion and the thoughts that I didn't want to enact any helpful behaviors at that point in time. Now, I wasn't going to the unhelpful behaviors, which I was really proud of because some of my thoughts were actually going into that space. And that was where I was at. So instead of actually moving forward, I was in a place where I was stopping myself from moving back. I wasn't sending those text messages that my head was telling me to send. I wasn't going out and doing those other actions that my head was trying to tell me to do. So I had enough awareness that, oh no, this is the emotion, right? This is the emotion creating this. And if you've been in my programs or if you've been on some of my webinars, you would have heard me possibly speak about the looping thoughts ladder that was taught to me by Marissa Peer through my RTT training. And that looping thoughts ladder goes into that space of the thoughts that you have create the emotions that you feel, create the behaviors that you have, and those behaviors then reaffirm those thoughts and it becomes a loop. And so my main aim at that point in time was just stopping the loop. I wasn't at the point where I wanted to change the loop at that point. I just wanted to stop it. And, I could have very well gone in and tried to distract myself with going into work and doing some things like that, or even doing some podcast interviews, because I really do love doing these. But and this is what happens as leaders. We can tend to go, right, I'm just going to go into work. I'm just going to go and distract myself. But that means you're going into that space still clouded by those emotions because we aren't robots. We can't turn them off. So although we're sort of pushing them down or pushing them aside, they've still got influence. So that means you're not going to be leading in an effective space or in the space that you want to. You're going to be leading from a space of just trying to survive in more of a survival aspect. So the first step is just having that acknowledgement of, okay, I'm in a really shitty spot right now, right? I'm feeling really overwhelmed. These emotions are getting the best of me. But what I'm not going to do is let them go in and change my behaviors or change the person that I am. And if anything, I'm going to try and tap into these and use these to help me grow, to help me become better at thinking more clearly and feeling a lot better and then behaving in more helpful and appropriate ways. Now, back in my younger years, I wasn't as good at this sort of stuff and I was very reaction driven. And there's a lot of things that I did that I'm not super proud of, but they were part of my learning journey. So I've been in a similar situation to what I've just experienced many moons ago, and my behaviors were really highly inappropriate and unhelpful. And so I knew that when all this happened, that was where my head was going to go. Well, I didn't know that, but that's where my head went, right? So I knew in that moment that my subconscious mind and my head was going back into, well, hey, let's go and do this again. This is kind of what gave you some quick gratitude in those spaces. But what it didn't give me was long-term healing, right? So that was my place. That was my main focus at that point in time, was stopping myself from going back into those reactive spaces and enacting some of these thoughts that come up. I did reach out in that space and give some sort of I suppose, story about how I was feeling and giving some perspective on that, but I didn't do it through, I'm feeling really crappy, I'm going to send this text message, right? I sat down and I wrote an email and I wrote it in a really calculated way. And, I didn't even have to send it. Just writing it and just putting onto paper how I was feeling, what I was thinking, and where I was at was really just a really cathartic process for me.
If you're enjoying this podcast and you want Niomi or any of her guests featured on your podcast or as a keynote speaker at your next event, you'll find their contact details included in the show notes. If you'd like to learn more about how you can work with Niomi individually or as part of your strategy to improve leadership in your business, then review the courses, offers and services at getupandgroconsulting.com.au.
Right. So that's one tip that I'm going to give you now is get it down on paper. Now, I'm not a journaler. I probably should do more journaling, and I know that there's a lot of great things that come from journaling, but it's kind of not me, right? Everyone's completely different and it's not my thing. So I'm not big on sitting down and doing heaps of journaling, but writing that email for me was just amazing because it let me articulate the way I was feeling and what I was thinking. And that in itself creates awareness, right? And allows it to process through. So I said before, we're sitting in it, it's all amongst us, it's clouding our judgment. So what we need to do is start clearing out, that windscreen and doing that. To do that, this is one of those ways. And that's to get it out of your system and write it down and create something tangible out of it, something you can see. So that was kind of the first step for me. And I actually, even though I do all this work, I was still really surprised the next day when I woke up on how much that had helped. Now, I wasn't out of the woods yet. I was still amongst it all, but I started to get some clarity. And not only did I start getting clarity, but I was also in a position where I was starting to think, what now can I do to make myself feel a little bit better? And by that, I don't mean distract myself. Because if you distract yourself, it takes longer to process, right? But what are some of the other tools I can start tapping into? Going for walks, getting out in nature was another thing that I did. I also turned to some of my energy knowledge as well and did some work in that space too. I reached out to some of my networks and I used that support system as well. So I started tapping into my tools, which actually then started letting all of this release even more and getting me to a place where I can come on and share with you guys without the emotion coming up, which is great. But also in a position where I can actually now start to function and still function at the level I want to, and still be able to deliver value in the services that I do with people. So, yeah, there was a period there where I closed off my calendar so people couldn't book in, and that's okay to do, right? We often think sometimes as small businesses that we can't say no to people, it's detrimental to our business, but showing up in a way that you're not actually serving your customers or your clients in the way that you should is probably more detrimental. So then from a leadership perspective, being able to get in that process of feel and then deal, that will then allow you to come back in and your customers and clients are your team members and your colleagues, right? So that allows you to come into that space where you can then serve them, where you should be serving them, where they deserve to be served by. Right. And it's very easy to go in and go, hey, I'm having a bad day and use that as an excuse. And everyone can make accommodations from time to time. But if the situation in your personal life is really deep or it's going on a little bit longer than you would have hoped, then you can't keep that excuse up forever. People are going to start thinking, well, come on, just do something about this, right? I'm tired of being on the receiving end of those comments or these behaviors. So you need to go and take some steps. Now, if you've, like me, and you work in this kind of industry and you have all the tools at your disposal, then definitely go ahead and do them. But, it may be that you want to reach out to someone. So you could go into that space of seeking out a counselor, psychotherapist, psychologist, or anything in that space. And in the past, that has been really helpful for me. I think that that's a really helpful way to deal with situations in your life that are really creating those heavy emotions. But for some people, that's not their thing. And, the RTT that I do might be something that is more relevant for you. And if you can't access my services, there's a lot of RTT therapists out there. You just have to Google it to be able to find one and go into that. And, with RTT, it's kind of the equivalent of 10 talk sessions with a counselor or a physiotherapist. So it's not designed to get rid of everything all at once, but it is really rapid, right? That's why it's RTT, rapid transformational therapy. So you can really get a lot of healing done in that one session, or if you choose to do so, multiple sessions, one after another. So once you're at the stage where you've had the ability to feel, and then you move in that ability to deal, you have to have some awareness and also have some kindness to yourself and acknowledge that you may be hit with another wave, right? You've gone down the beach, you've been dumped, you've got to surrender to the dump, So you got to feel, right? You just got to surrender to the dump. And then at some point, you're like, cool, I can get out of this dump. So then you can start to deal. But sometimes we're not able to get out of it as quickly as what we'd like. And another wave comes and it dumps us again. Now we're probably going to be a little bit more in the shallows, right? Because we've made a little bit of progress. So the dump's not going to be as bad, which is, yay, grateful for that. But you could go back into these spaces. And again, you just follow that same process. You feel and then you deal. But try not to just suppress and walk away, because that's still going to come out in the way that you show up. And you might not have awareness of that, but the people around you will. And if we do go into that energy perspective, your energy will be filled with all of those emotions and those thoughts, and other people will pick up on that as well. So if you're usually really inspirational and really motivational with the people around you, usually you can just walk in a room and show up and people feel that and they're drawn to you and they pick up on the things that you say and they act from that space. And it's really easy to influence when people feel that pure energy, right? When they feel that that energy has the right intent. But if you come in and you're in that cloudy space, people are going to feel that and they're going to be a little bit dubious. They're going to step back and you're not going to have as much ability to influence. So just have some acknowledgement around that as well, because that can then create its own frustrations, right? If we try and suppress and we go in as leaders to try and show up and be, in that leadership role and lead our team, and we're not doing it as well as we know we can, then we raise a whole heap of other sorry, I can't even speak, inadequacies, self-doubt, maybe imposter syndrome, that this then just compounds on that emotion that we've tried to push away. So I hope that was a little bit helpful for anyone out there that's experiencing some really big challenges in their life. One of the things I did realize when I was first coming in to this whole phase of my life, I did share with a room of people that I was in a space where I was super challenged from an emotional perspective. And I looked around the room and I said to everyone in that room, I said, so I want you to put your hand up at the moment if you're not experiencing any challenges out of work. And whether they may not have felt like they could, but no one put their hand up, right? So that whole room full of people all had their own stuff going on. And sometimes we don't recognize that. And sometimes it's really big stuff that they've got going on and they're still trying to show up. So the flip side of trying to show up as a leader in the right way is recognizing that sometimes our team will be trying to do the same thing. And yes, it can be frustrating if they're making errors because their cognition's not clear, right? Because of all of that heavy emotion, or if they are snapping at the people around them, or if they're snapping at you or short with you. But it's about then going on and creating some curiosity. And we don't always have to know the intricate details of what's going on in someone's life. We can still show some empathy, just knowing that they've got things going on that are really challenging at this point in time. And if there's ability for it, take off some of those tasks that require people to really concentrate and really have that meticulous attention to detail, because they're not going to be able to. Even if they're dump at the door kind of people and they've come in to work and they're functioning, it's just the way our brain and our chemistry works. If we've got all different emotions in our body, those different emotions are firing off different chemicals in our brain. And if we're in a space where we're just trying to survive, just keep our head above water, then our brain's not looking at ways that we can be clever and creative, and our cognition isn't in its peak, right? All of those things take a back seat to be processing some of the things we're going through. And it can be distracting and it can take us to different places. But being there to support the team or the team member is really important as a leader. And that's where you can offer them the services of your EAP. Now, in my background and my experience being in HR, very rarely do people take up the offer of the EAP, which is just really silly. And I don't know if it's because of the stigma attached or what it is, but very rarely do people do it. But the other thing with that is when people do take up the EAP, just be conscious and aware that some EAPs are that booked up that it can take up to 3 to 6 weeks for them to actually be able to speak or see someone. And I should mention for EAP, for those who are unaware, it's an employee assistance program. It's usually a counselling or a psychological services that's been attached to your company that they've got an agreement with that team members can go and see. So that's something else I do offer, but I offer it through the RTT. So, I have offered, there have been some clients that have reached out where I have just given some talk therapy sessions to some of their team members, and that's been fine. And I've usually done that in the space of, okay, here, I'll provide that for them until they can get access to their EAP, just so that there's that gap there and that bridge. But I'm sure there's other organizations as well in your area that will be able to do that if you reach out and have a chat with them. So that's kind of a bit of a summary of everything there. I mean, something else as a leader that you can do if you recognize that your team have some big stuff going on, and this always, it doesn't always have to be in the personal space either, right? If you know that in your business that there's going to be some big changes happening that could be really disruptive to people, making them feel a bit insecure and unsafe, then you can get people in to come and talk about that, right? Make it part of your change management process that you have someone coming in that talks about this is possibly going to be how you feel, and these are some ways that you can deal. So take them through and give them those tools from the upfront so that they're not actually chasing their tail. And that'll make a huge difference on some of the big changes that you're going to be implementing. In my personal experience, from a professional perspective, it's when something's been dumped on me and all the planning's been done and everything's happened, and it's like, oh, by the way, this is happening. That's been the most difficult to process because I haven't been able to influence it at all. I haven't been able to share my opinion. Now, even if I shared my opinion and it wasn't taken on board, at least I would have had the opportunity to do that. And that can make a whole heap of difference in that looping thoughts ladder, from the thoughts that come up, the emotions and the behaviors. Because when we think that something is completely out of our control is when we start to feel unsafe on a subconscious level. And when we start to feel unsafe or unworthy or not enough on a subconscious level, then we're not being able to actively control those thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. And that can lead to a whole range of different disasters. So thanks for listening to this episode. If you are experiencing anything that's super challenging at the moment and any of the content in here has triggered you or has brought on another wave and you feel like you're being dumped again, then please feel free to reach out to me. You can book a free discovery call under the RTT element of my website, getupandgrowconsulting.com.au. And you don't need to sign up for any programs. You can just use that to have a bit of a chat with me if you need after listening to this episode. So I hope you have enjoyed the episode, and I hope that you have a wonderful day, week, month, year, and I look forward to serving you again in our next episode. Thanks for joining in and listening to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. It's been great having you here. And if you'd like to go and like and subscribe and maybe even leave a 5-star rating if you think it's worth it, I'd really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.